BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. And just a couple of quick announcements before we begin. The first is that there was not a regularly scheduled AMA that came out on Wednesday, and then there was some breaking news in the Zodiac Killer world, so I devoted a couple episodes to that subject involving the suspect Gary Post. But you guys have left so many excellent comments all up and down the channel on all kinds of episodes, so I decided to do an AMA on the weekend. On the weekends, I've been doing a debunking series where I talk about certain Zodiac Killer suspects that I think are absolutely not on point, but I'm going to be doing an AMA this weekend, so if you're listening to this on Friday, you are awesome. I mean it. But then in the next 2 days, there will be an AMA where I will respond to your questions and comments, so please look out for that. The second announcement is that today I'm going to be talking about the death penalty, again, responding to your guys' comments from last week's episode, and also a little bit from the book Rescued and Restored by Raul Cortez, and the foreword was by Soren Korsgaard. He wrote an essay, really. I mean, the foreword to this book is really an essay by Soren Korsgaard, and I was using that as the substance material for last week's episode, and I'm going to be doing an episode on Monday about his book, America's Jack the Ripper, The Crimes and Psychology of the Zodiac Killer Case. So that will be for Zodiac Mondays. Please look out for that book discussion. And if you haven't hit the like button and subscribed yet, now is an excellent time to do so, to follow along with all of these things. And then doesn't cost anything to subscribe. And another thing that it doesn't cost anything for is to go over to LaunchPad 1 and you can download the show for free. That's the audio version of this program as a pure podcast. You can take it on the go anywhere and anyhow. Some people say they like to listen to the show while driving, but you can be one of the thousands of people who has downloaded this program, BlackBoxOnlineRadio, for free at LaunchPad 1, and there is a link to that in the description box. Another great way to support the show, in addition to just listening, is to go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. It's a novel, murder mystery. It was inspired by some of the events in the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is totally done in a fictional way. There's a link to that in the description box as well, and there is always the Teespring page. Have a look at some of the merchandise, and remember, being weird is not a crime. Last week I did an episode for the Anything Goes segment called What They Don't Want You to Know About the Death Penalty, and I responded to that essay, as I said, by Soren Korsgaard, and I have some comments from you guys that came in on that one, and I thought that instead of just interweaving these into the AMA, I would do it for the Anything Goes segment, and then I will get to some material in the book Rescued and Restored, where all of these things originally started from. So, first I would like to begin with a comment from Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCyphers.com, who wrote into the show and said, "The thing is, Ned, pro-death penalty advocates don't mind executing innocent people, arguing that it is statistically a very small percentage, and there is no reason to tear down the whole system. That overwhelmingly gets it correct. Now imagine one of their family members was executed for a crime they didn't commit, and you walked up to them and said, 'Don't worry about your state-murdered family member. Statistically, most of the time they get it right.' You see, they don't mind innocent people being murdered when they are somebody else's family member, but if it were their own family member, their tune would certainly change. Now it's no longer just a statistic. Their hypocrisy and selfishness knows no bounds. Unless you can execute correctly 100% of the time, the American death penalty should be scrapped. The American court system is multi-tiered and corrupt, with an inherent racial, wealth, and class bias rooted at its core. Big thank you to Richard for the comment, and I won't talk too much about that last sentence about inherent racial wealth and class bias, because there are many other places here on the internet where you can find that info. But I believe that Richard is referring to some comments that I made in the previous episode about how I used to be extremely pro-death penalty, and then I had a reversal on the subject a couple of years ago, because the possibility does indeed exist that someone can be executed when they are innocent, and you are meant to be found guilty or not guilty, not guilty or innocent. So it's really just about winning, and the lawyers on both sides of the aisle are simply trying to win their cases, and that means that the prosecutors could convict someone who didn't actually commit the crime. And if that person is convicted, they can even go through the appeal process, and if somebody appears guilty, or even if the evidence isn't the strongest, this does seem to happen, that innocent people are executed. I brought up a story from Rhode Island in the 1800s, and also that statistic that maybe you've heard that's been shared around a lot of discussion programs about how 4% of people who are executed are actually innocent. I mean, what I was trying to say in the previous episode was, even if that turns out that it's not true, and it's 3% or 5%, the possibility still exists. But we had a response to Richard's comment, just here on that episode from Wacky Wayfarer, who says, weekly corporal punishment for the nastiest killers would probably be shot down as cruel and unusual. As long as it doesn't scar, I wouldn't think so. Richard Grinnell responded by saying, I don't have any objection to the death penalty on moral grounds. These people can be tortured and murdered for all I care, but only if they are guilty. Now, Richard can respond if he wants in the comment section here, but I think he's saying that there is no way to actually know 100% if everybody, absolutely everyone who gets put on death row in the United States of America, is actually guilty, because that's not what the legal system determines. It doesn't determine guilt or innocence. It's like, can you prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? And I know some people who listen to this program are lawyers, and if they have anything they want to share and weigh in, they can also do that. So, on to the next comment. This is from Classic Chevy Cat, who says, this is an extremely tough topic to discuss. If one could pick and choose, then yes, I'm for capital punishment, Dennis Rader, Ted Bundy, Gary Ridgway, etc. But every state, attorney, judge, jurors, and crimes are different. Let me put it to you like this. If I witnessed my mom slain in front of my eyes, do you think I would want that SOB to die? Does that make me bloodthirsty and vengeful? It makes me human. Why would I want my mom's murderer rotting in prison? Sitting here typing this, I'd want him not to exist on this earth. And then there is the question, could I be the one to flip the switch? Getting too deep now. Since there have been innocent people executed, I must say I'm against it, because we can't pick and choose. Not sure if what I said made sense. Must give this more thought. Ned, you really get me thinking. Great show. Hey, Classic Chevy Cat. Appreciated. I think that there are some people who are so dangerous that they are unable to live in society, and that they would have to do something cruel and unusual to allow them to continue to remain alive. I mean, complete and intense solitary confinement for the rest of their lives, but then they might even do something harmful to themselves if they are completely unmonitored, and then that's just back to square one. Like, instead of executing somebody, you would just be driving somebody to suicide, or putting someone in a place where they could drive themselves to suicide, and it really is an imperfect world. And it seems like the prison system and the legal system exist because they need to deal with the imperfections in the world, to deal with the imperfections in our societies. As far as anything to do with torturous responses or torturous methods, I have to be opposed to those practices as well, because it comes to a certain point when they're just deemed inhumane, and I think I'll leave it at that. To hear a response in the other direction, we have a comment that came in from Rob S., who says, I don't think the death penalty is strong enough. We live in a country where you can be put to death for certain crimes, and the crime numbers go up, not down. A death sentence is not even to deter the horrible actions of certain people. A death sentence is not even enough to deter the horrible actions of certain people. Big thank you to Rob S. for the comment. I was talking about this with somebody once, and he said the death penalty should not be about lethal injection. It should not be about the electric chair. And I believe in some places in America they still have the right to do hangings and the firing squad. Firing squad is a method of execution, which I know you guys know what it is, but 5 people shoot at the prisoner, and only 4 of them have live ammunition. One of them has a blank or a piece of ammo that isn't real, because they want to protect the well-being of the guards. I mean, Classic Chevy Cat was asking, could she be the person to flip the switch on the electric chair or the mechanism for lethal injection? Well, they don't want any single person to think that they're so overcome with traumatic guilt for being the person who killed another human being, even if it's done for a state execution. So only 4 people have the actual ammunition, and there's always the possibility, well, maybe it wasn't my bullet that actually took this person's life. I always thought that was something really interesting. Not good or bad, just interesting. So there are different methods that exist for lethal executions in the American justice system. And a couple of years ago, I was talking about this with someone, and what he said was, the death penalty should not be about the electric chair. The death penalty should not use lethal injection. Nobody is afraid of lethal injection. Nobody is afraid of the electric chair. With lethal injection, it just looks like someone is down on this board-like device, and it seems like maybe there's 15 minutes of discomfort, and then they're dead. The death penalty should be someone is tied to a post, and then they are beaten to death with a baseball bat. That is going to be slow, and it's going to be painful, it's going to be miserable, and if people were to watch that and to think, hey, wait a second, that could happen to me, then maybe they wouldn't go out and commit crimes. Like, think about the people who Classic Chevy Cat just listed off: Gary Ridgway, Dennis Rader, Ted Bundy. People wouldn't go out and do these atrocious acts if they were going to be deterred from experiencing something like that, slow, miserable, and painful. What do you think about that, though? That's his response. I'm being very clear now. Some people can't always get what I'm telling a story, that it's not actually my voice. That was just some guy that I was talking to that I knew several years ago. But it's really quite in line with what Rob S. just said. Point number 1 about that, and this isn't even a forward, that's just point number 1, I don't think that would deter people from committing crimes, because those guys, Gary Ridgway, Ted Bundy, Dennis Rader, many of the other serial killers that we've talked about on this channel, such as D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, Roger Kibbe, the I-5 Strangler, and there's a reason I mentioned them, they operate in a way that allows them to think that they are higher than the law, that they are above the law. They are operating in a way which makes them think that they can weave around the principles of society, that they can just go through like a downhill skier around the poles and like around those little flag things, that they're not going to get caught. They think they're too smart for it. They're not going to follow the law. They think they are above it. You could call it Machiavellian, or you could call it just being an arrogant jerk who's hiding in the shadows. That stuff is definitely present, and they're going to think, I'm not going to get caught. I'm too smart for that. So, the reason why I mentioned Joseph D'Angelo and Roger Kibbe, who is the I-5 Strangler, I have an episode about him as well on this channel, is because they got information directly from law enforcement, and they used that info against the people in their communities. D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, was part of an anti-burglary task force, and he's using all of this knowledge in his from his anti-burglary task force to break into people's homes. First, he's like a ransacker, then he's committing sexual assaults. He was murdering people eventually. The Golden State Killer. Roger Kibbe was a little bit different because he obtained info from his brother, who was a homicide detective, and they're just talking the way that brothers do, and then he's actually using the info about how his brother's sharing with him, and he's using that to be a serial killer. And Roger Kibbe was not executed, he was murdered in prison, and, well, who knows what's going to happen to D'Angelo. But I'm not completely convinced that that would deter people from committing these types of crimes. But also, Classic Chevy Cat brought up that interesting thing about how, is it really unfair, or is it bloodthirsty to want execution for someone who murdered someone else's family member? On the one hand, you have an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you have taken somebody else's life and you have been found guilty in a court of law, do they not have the right to take your life instead? I mean, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I used to be all about that stuff. I think it comes from Hammurabi, but I don't remember too much about that. One thing I remember that has been attributed to Gandhi, I don't know if he actually said it or not, but it was that an eye for an eye makes the world go blind. Now, the problem with that is, that almost seems like you're trying to structure a society on compassion, which does not work, because the concept of punishment doesn't fit in too well in the world of compassion, or a compassionate society is going to be an impractical society because it doesn't stand up well to criticism. So, is the death penalty good or bad? Is the death penalty deterring anybody presently? No, I don't think it is. And even if there was a harsher death penalty, being tied to a post and beaten with a baseball bat, perhaps that wouldn't deter people either, because the people who are committing these types of murders are so far gone. They just think, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to get caught. And they also are deranged. Let's not forget that. They may not be clinical psychotics. They might have full awareness that they're doing bad things, but they are deranged individuals who just want to kill people. We have a comment that came in from Steve Allen, who says, "True crime topics suit you well, Ned. I'm so sick of politics. I'm glad you've moved away from talking about politics as much." Oh yes, back in 2018, 2019, I did a lot of political episodes, stuff on Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I was anticipating the upcoming 2020 presidential election, and then just on some other things like mass shootings as well, and the responses from politicians, and responding to the presidential debates in the primaries. Lots of things going on. But I stopped talking about politics because it's simply not relevant to most of the true crime discussions. And I don't even think the death penalty is a political issue. It's much more of a social issue, and talking about how it affects the people rather than any type of legislation that could be put into law for the purpose of this discussion and what I'm doing here on Black Box Online Radio. But somebody else once wrote into the channel and they said, "Thank you, Ned, for talking about the Zodiac Killer case, but not incorporating politics into it." And I was like, well, maybe I did a couple times, like I did the Zodiac Killer CIA connection, and that's going to get political at a certain point. But for the vast majority of the time, it's just not relevant. It's just not part of the discussion. So that's an easy one to keep politics out of the true crime discussions. I mean, if you want to get political, you can propose certain ideas and say, hey, they should have this law where anytime somebody is convicted of a certain degree of homicide, like a homicide. Okay, someone commits a murder, first degree, second degree murder, something like that. Immediately their DNA is put into a database where that can be examined. And I'm not talking about any single offender. Like, you got a traffic ticket, they got to take your DNA. No. Something like murder, first degree murder, second degree murder, manslaughter. They create a national database for all of that. So, say if they had anybody's DNA on a piece of paper that they were able to extract, or how about genealogical profiles, like going back to those Ancestry.com like websites? then they could see if this person's DNA is relevant to a different crime, and then they could just run it through the database. It's something that's been talked about, and the other side of suffering explores this idea. Another interesting true crime political idea was something that I heard on the Lord and Arts channel, and it was about how the police system and the investigators and the detectives do not really have a good way of sharing information with the family members of the victims, and they need to create a liaison force that is going to keep the victims' families updated on the developments of the case. What are they allowed to say? What are they not allowed to say? I mean, you wouldn't even really need that many people in a community. Just someone is able to talk to the victims' families and say, okay, this is where the investigation is. I can share this with you. This is, no, that's privileged. I can't talk about that, but this is what I can reveal to you. I think that's a brilliant idea. You can weigh in the comments section if you would like to agree or disagree. But I also said that I was going to talk to you guys about the book Rescued and Restored, The Memoirs of a Death Row Inmate by Raul Cortez. And I've been reading this one, and it's available from Korsgaard Publishing. And it's a very emotional read. I find that I read about 10 pages and then I just have to sit down for a while. And I mean, I read sitting down. I don't really do that whole walking and reading thing. Some people are into that. But I just have to put the book down rather. And I'm like, oh, wow. Because it brings back a lot of memories of bad experiences, mostly based on the confrontations that Raul Cortez has experienced with other people during his legal process. And one night, he is just going to the office because he forgot his laptop and his cigarettes, and he is driving into the office building, and then he is swarmed by all kinds of legal SWAT teams, as well as people who are from multiple states. He was arrested in the state of Florida and then extradited to the state of Texas, and I will read the back of the book here. In 2009, Raul Cortez was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the 2004 McKinney murders. From his claustrophobic death row cell, he authored this book on an old-fashioned typewriter. Without censorship, he takes readers through the madness of being locked up in the house of death. Rescued and Restored not only provides a rare glimpse into the life on death row, but it also captures Raul's struggle to find hope and purpose amid addiction, depression, and the execution of his friends. So, in the early parts of the book, I had the chance to read some stories that you don't hear too much about in the true crime world, because many parts of the true crime world focus on the victims, and if they talk about the criminals, they want to show how the criminal committed the crime, and if they did indeed commit the crime, what were the psychological elements that drove them to do this? Like we're talking all about those serial killers. What were the events in their lives that made them become serial killers? I have numerous episodes on those subjects. I think they're completely enthralling. But for this one, this shows what happens when someone is arrested for something, as you see here, dealing with murders. And we're going to have to do a full episode on the McKinney murders. But first, he's taken into a prison infirmary and put on suicide watch. And then he's just like, well, suicide watch? What on earth? Like, why are they keeping me in this infirmary? And then he's just placed in a room filled with blank walls, and there's nothing there, and he's just sitting, and he's just absolutely losing it. And it took him a while to realize it, but it's a technique involving will breaking. And then he's interrogated, and again, they're just becoming very confrontational with him. They're trying to extract either a confession or signs of guilt, and that is another form of will breaking. And then Raul Cortez's story actually caught on nationwide, and I even have trouble believing this. It sounds like something that's out of either a movie or some type of young adult TV show where while they're extraditing him back to Texas, they stop at a fast food restaurant and he is like wearing shackles, and they walk him in and he gets his food, and then all of a sudden he appears on the television. The television does a story about his arrest, and then people recognize him, so they just have to hurry him out of there. I mean, it really does sound like something that's right out of the movies, but it goes to show you that there are certain parts of the experience that prisoners go through that are often left out of the true crime programs. So then, I would like to read a segment from Raul Cortez's book from chapter 4 that talks about the um, the experiences that he had after first being arrested. The only time I saw anyone was when the guards would bring me food. There were a few times when the guards would forget to bring me food. My food trays, that is. They probably just ate the food themselves or gave it to another inmate. The cell was really beginning to get to me. The combination of the isolation, with the silence and the feeling of helplessness, they were all starting to come down on me. I tried to sleep the days away, but my body could not lie on that hard bunk all day long. My back would begin to hurt, along with the rest of my body. I believe this is when depression first began to appear in my life. A couple of days later, a guard came to the cell door and asked if I wanted to do a media interview. At first I thought he was just playing with me or mocking me in some way, as I still had no idea that my arrest was being covered by all major news media in the country. I remember the cameras in the courtroom, but I still hadn't put it all together. I had no desire of doing any type of interview with anyone, and I told the guard so. He asked me to sign a waiver declining the interview. The guard returned several times in the following days as different media groups were interested in an interview with me. I finally asked one of the guards why all these people wanted to talk to me, and he said, "Man, you're a famous guy right now. Your picture is on every newspaper and news program in the state of Florida." I was shocked to say the least. I still hadn't been allowed to get in touch with anyone in the outside world, as a as I had not been allowed to purchase any commissary, so I could not at the very least write to my family and let them know that I was okay. The prison commissary is a store from which inmates can purchase products such as hygiene items, snacks, and writing materials, and so forth. I had no idea what was going on in the free world. My family was constantly on my mind. Had they already heard the news? I figured if the guard was telling me the truth and my arrest was as high profile as he said he was, then I was sure my family had heard. I was worried as to how the news of my arrest had reached them. And this is once again from the book Rescued and Restored: The Memoirs of a Death Row Inmate by Raul Cortez. So, with the American prison system, it is not designed for anything other than punishment. And there was a video that I was watching that was actually put out by the Young Turks, a news agency that I absolutely do not follow now. I only ever clicked on their videos by mistake. I never even liked them. I would never search for them. They would just always be in the suggested videos on YouTube. I don't know if they're still doing anything now. They don't seem to come up anymore. Maybe it's because, as Steve said, I get away from the political stuff. But they did a comparison between prisons in the United States and prisons in Norway, and it appeared that in Norway the prisons were actually focused more on rehabilitation. But some people might not even want to hear that, but the primary objective of the American prison system is about punishment. And I think that Raoul's book, if anything, has showed me that there are lots of tactics that are not even about being punished for your crimes. It's about will breaking, it's about control. And those things about the reason why the cell is so unpleasant is not only to punish someone for the crime, because at this point, this is just in chapter 4, Raoul has not been convicted of anything. You're innocent until proven guilty, right? But then, well, you'd have to ask, well, why is he in that cell? Why is he forced to spend the entirety of every day on that metal bunk? The answer, according to Raoul, is that it says in the book is it was most likely done as a form of will breaking. The guards are trying to show that they are in control and they want to weaken the person. So I would love to know what you guys think about that, but I would also like to know your response to that bigger challenge question that I had posed to you. Do you think a more do you think a harsher death penalty would deter people from committing crimes? Like that one guy I said in the past who said, if you were tied to a post and beaten to death with a baseball bat, and that is the death penalty, do you think that would get people to stop committing crimes? Or that we would see a nationwide decline in murders? That people, like some of those serial killers we were talking about, are going to be like, well, if I get caught and I get convicted, I'm going to have to experience a very, very painful form of death. On the one hand, I completely agree that people are not afraid of lethal injection and they are not afraid of the electric chair. I don't have anything to go off of than my gut instinct. I'm not a mind reader, I'm not a psychic. But I don't. I think that as an American who watches that stuff on TV, the electric chair a little bit, lethal injection, no. It's not terrifying. It doesn't scare you. That's the real challenge question that I would like you guys to respond to. Do you think a more torturous death penalty or a harsher death penalty would deter people from committing crimes? And you can give your reasons down below. Maybe you think that, yes, absolutely it would, because people would not want to experience an extremely painful and eviscerating death. Or do you think that it's like the other side, that these people are just so detached from reality, they think they're so above the law and above the rest of society and they can just roam in the shadows and not get caught? That's just it. They're not going to get caught. They're too smart for that in their own minds. Which one do you agree with? Or maybe you think of something completely different. And if you do have any other responses, like maybe you don't think that the American justice system is about punishment, maybe you do think it's also about rehabilitation, but there isn't always one single answer. Rehabilitation is part of it, but punishment seems to be the number one issue. And this is the first book that I've read that really just talked about the will-breaking aspect of it, like it's about control. And someone once said, we don't live in a world of virtue, we live in a world of power. Well, feel free to respond any way you want in the comment section down below. Thank you for listening to this episode. And I don't really like doing true crime debates where people are trying to actually get in some shouting match over the facts of a case. But maybe on the channel in the future there could be a debate about some social issues like the death penalty or some different aspects connected to true crime, like the pros and cons of some of those points that we mentioned about collecting people's DNA for a nationwide database that is used to find criminals. Is that going to violate people's rights and so on? And I know that is not the most exciting topic in the world, but I do have one more comment that came in from 15 Lee, who said, you did a video on helping people sleep. And yes, I did. I was going to start a series called Podcast for Sleep on Black Box Online Radio, where I was just going to talk about things that allow people to surround themselves with positive vibes and so on. And 15 Lee says, your video on helping sleep, unfortunately, it made me think too hard and laugh out loud, so it kept me awake, but you are great at talking and your voice is excellent for sleepiness. Maybe talk about something super boring, lol. But yes, please put more out there, something to work on, keep up the good work. And yeah, in the future, I am going to continue that series, the podcast for sleep, but I might start a new YouTube channel or go back to that one I did called AstroPsych 400, where I was talking about astrology. I mean, that still exists. I could do something over there on it, but what really would be a boring topic? When 15 Lee wrote that out, the first thing that I thought about was an episode of The Simpsons that featured Krusty the Clown before he was doing like a kids' entertainment show, and he was talking to the president of the AFL-CIO about collective bargaining agreements. And I was just like, well, yeah, that would probably put people to sleep. No, the first one I did, though, and you can hear this on Black Box Online Radio, was just about kindness, surrounding yourself with positive vibes before going to sleep and so on. And they would all be done in a similar way. I had so many planned out, like doing one on honesty, doing one on just fairness and so on. But it's really just not the material for Black Box Online Radio, so those will come out in the future on a different channel. Thank you so much to everybody who has listened to this episode here. And if there's something that I didn't say about the death penalty that you really want to respond to, you can put your response down in the comments section below. Share anything that you are thinking and feeling at the present time. And thank you to everyone who listened to the episode on Gary Post as a Zodiac killer suspect. You guys really helped out the channel. And please look out for that book discussion on Monday on America's Jack the Ripper by Soren Korsgaard. That's all for me now. You can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And until next time.